Hello and welcome to Warcraft Daily for today, the 17th of October 2013. So in today's news we have a whole bunch of new connected realms, which is pretty cool, some hotfixes which include a lot of Siege of Orgrimmar nerfs, especially on Raid Finder difficulty, then some talk about flex scaling, and finally the Winged Guardian. So to kick off the news, connected realms are definitely ramping up, and the following US realms are going to be connected soon. We have Balnazar and Warsong, Gurabashi and Aegwynn, Dalvengir, something like that, and Dark Iron, Garithos and Cormagus, Onyxia and Burning Blade, and finally Maiev and Shadowscalp. Now, previously they've only had 2 or 3 realms connected in total, like 2 or 3 different processes, I suppose, have been done. This is much more, and perhaps this signifies that this is going to be rolled out very soon to a lot more realms. This is great. If you're the kind of person that's on a relatively empty realm, you want more players to play with, maybe you can't find people for your guild, stuff like that, then this is just fantastic news. It means that, well, stuff's really ramping up, and that's fantastic. Connected Realms is such a great feature, it should help out the game a lot, I feel. Like, I'd say that, like, proportionally there's a lot more people leaving the game from lower pop servers because they don't want to pay the transfer fee and they're just having all these sort of gameplay issues because there's not enough players. This should hopefully fix that. Now, for hotfixes, there are quite a few, and mainly these are to do with Siege of Orgrimmar, and this is probably good news if you're doing a lot of LFR, because there's been, well, I don't know, perhaps some of the bosses have had 1 or 2 issues in LFR. So first of all, for the Timeless Treasures quest, the weekly treasure chests on the Isle now grant credit, and then also for the other stuff, for the raid, for Galacrast, now this is a normal mode one, they have reduced the health of the high-ranking officials and foot soldiers on phase 1 in 10-player difficulty normal. This is a little bit interesting to me, a little bit odd actually. I can see them being a little bit high for some groups, but honestly, if you're positioning things well, like in Jaina's Blizzard, I don't think it should be such a giant problem, but, I guess maybe their data has indicated that that's a roadblock to a lot of people, and perhaps they don't want a roadblock as the 5th boss. Which does make sense. Most guilds will start hitting roadblocks, I'd say, past Malkorok. Now, also, for the Kor'kron Dark Shaman, this is on Raid Finder difficulty, and Ashen Wall, Toxic Storm, Toxic Mist, Foul Stream, and Foul Geyser now deal less damage on Raid Finder. This is a flat nerf to the boss, and I think probably quite a good one. Kor'kron Dark Shaman is, I think, it's not like it has mechanics where one person can fuck over the whole raid. It just has so many mechanics that the average LFR group, which probably won't have as many ultra-skilled people who read up on their bosses and stuff, which is to be expected. I think this boss just got so many different mechanics and things that it throws at you that it's too hard to manage. So I think this is probably a fair enough nerf. In general, I'm not the kind of person that gets too pissed off at Raid Finder nerfs. I think that they're usually fair enough. Because a nerf in Raid Finder will probably up the play experience of a lot of people, because you don't really go into Raid Finder to have ultra challenging bosses, you go in there to see the content and get a bit of loot, and that's really it. For Spoils of Pandaria, most of the health of the creatures has been reduced on Raid Finder difficulty, and having multiple players start the encounter should no longer cause the timer to count down repeatedly and screw up, so that's nice. Also for Thok the Bloodthirsty, the captive cave bats on Raid Finder difficulty will no longer be dropping normal difficulty loot. Whoops. And then finally for Garrosh Hellscream, he should start using his abilities more predictably when starting stage 3 of the fight. So there we go, lots of LFR nerfs to probably some of the bosses that Blizzard's had seen were causing more of an issue with groups. They can see when groups wipe, they can see at what bosses people leave the most at, so therefore they put in a few different nerfs like this, and hopefully they'll see those numbers decrease. And that's the general idea of how they nerf content like this. So the next thing on the news is flex scaling, and well, we did touch on this a little bit yesterday, but there's been a lot more talk about it from the blues, more examples and stuff like that, so let's just get straight into a quote. Boss mechanics inevitably involve some breakpoints. Alas, there's no way for Malkorok to say create precisely 3.7 implosions, and that they do need a skill in some form, or abilities only targeting 2 players out of a 25-person flex raid would make those mechanics feel completely trivial and detract from the intended experience and tuning. So that's why there does need to be flexibility in some boss mechanics, like say Malkorok making more implosions, that kind of thing. But of course that does naturally mean that there's very rarely where there'll be like one version or one instance of a mechanic that applies to every single person in the raid. It'll be like Malkorok's Implosions, where there's 2 of them that apply to a 10-person raid. It just means that when they're scaling things up, there are obviously going to be breakpoints where, say, a 13-player comp is going to be stronger than a 16-player comp, and that's just the way of it. But the thing is, I think that the way that Flex is, like, its intended audience, the way it's meant to be tuned, is that these don't matter enormously. Like, on Malkorok, does one more implosion really hurt you that badly? I mean, as long as your group's half competent, it doesn't. So I don't think this is a humongous issue. I think what's actually more interesting to me is boss health and damage scaling, and we actually have quite an interesting tidbit in that. So they are both completely linear, and the boss health and damage scaling are both completely linear and proportional to the group size, but scale up more slowly than the raid does. So all else being equal, if you add players with roughly, on average, like skill and gear of your current group, then it should be an easier time as a result. For an example, on Thok, he has 355 million health on a 10-player flexible raid, but if you add an 11th person, his health goes up to 390 million. i.e. you've increased your raid's damage output by somewhere between 14 and 20% depending on how many healers you have, but the boss's health went up by 10%. So yeah, that's interesting. It basically means that DPS-wise things should get easier the more players you have. Adding an 11th player will also make Thok melee for about 3% more damage, which is barely noticeable. So I think this is just fair enough, really. It makes sense. Now on to the final bit of news, which isn't a giant bit, but the Winged Guardian is now 33% off on the pet store. This brings it down to £11.35 or $16.75. So yeah, if you want to throw your money into a pet that costs the same as like a month of game time, then you can, because Blizzard, these are too expensive. But anyway, enough of that. I don't know, I think they charge too much for all these extra, like, game thingies. It just, maybe if this was a free-to-play game, but in a subscription fee one, I think that charging $25 base for a new mount is kinda crazy. Like, that's the sort of thing you expect from a free-to-play model, not a pay-to-play model, but, whatever. It seems to work for them, so I guess, well, more power to them. Anyway, that's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and with that, I'll see you next time.